Thank you for being here.
And once again, I want to welcome special guests. I mean, you are all special guests, and it's so great to see you all, and everyone is familiar. By the way, is Betty here who gave me the chocolate?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet.
We're hoping she'll come.
I would like to thank her. That's a really nice. She gave me chocolate and somehow got a photo of me, and I don't know where that photo came from, but that's great. So, but at any rate, as with last time, we have with us a special guest, Jane Ericor, and she's a wonderful pianist, musician, and human being. That always goes together. And her husband was the great Daniel Ericor, and played one of his arrangements last time, and probably will play it again today. He was a pianist, a composer. He knew Debussy, Ravel, and has really quite a fascinating, incredible background. Was at UNCG for many years, right here. So, but I'd like to start with something a little lighthearted. You remember the silly improvisation thing I did last time? I think I did Happy Birthday in the style of like Debussy or something. I was thinking, since Christmas is coming, why don't we take something like maybe Jingle Bells and play that I'll play that in the style of a classical composer of your choice. That's going to be odd. Anybody?
Dvorak.
Dvorak.
Brahms.
Well, I could do.
Mendelssohn.
No, I was just thinking. I can try Dvorak. So let's see.
Or you could do Mozart.
We could try Mozart.
Whatever you want.
Maybe one more will do Mozart. Which Mozart is deceptively simple. Somebody said, I think Schnabel, the pianist artist Schnabel, said Mozart is too easy for children and too difficult for adults. Yeah. So let's see how we do Mozart. So, okay. Two is good. It's like how many slices of cake I usually eat. So don't tell me. Two would be good. So I'm going to now start with part I'm thinking of our French connection here with the airy course, but part 2, the second movement of Beethoven's Violin Concerto, arranged or really adapted for the piano by Beethoven himself. And I'll speak again about the history of the composition. You know, Beethoven, he wrote it in 1806. And the first performance, well, it did not go well. At least Beethoven was not happy. Most of the audience fell asleep. And probably because the music is very meditative, it's very inward looking, it's relatively quiet for Beethoven, and very long, though the second movement is not that long, but it is very calm. It's so calm. And I think people didn't connect to it at the time. And what happened, I think this is really a funny story, that Franz Clement, the violinist at the first performance, actually noticed that everyone had fallen asleep. So what he did was he took his violin, turned it upside down, and improvised a country fiddle tune to wake everybody up. Can you imagine that at Carnegie Hall today? It's interesting that in those days, I think the art of performance was a lot more, there was more room for things like that. Those would not be unexpected things. But at any rate, Beethoven, you could imagine, was not pleased with the whole thing. And with the advice of his friend Clementi, another composer, great composer, he rewrote it for piano. Both versions were sort of forgotten until Mendelssohn and Joachim, the great Hungarian violinist, in the 1830s and 40s, they sort of resurrected the piece, and it became what it is today, remains today, maybe the most beloved violin concerto, the Beethoven D major. But I think the most significant detail about this, it's not a detail, and forgive me if it's repetitive from last time saying this, but Beethoven wrote the piece at the time that he really knew he was losing his hearing. And he did not take it well, obviously. So can you imagine, for anyone, but particularly for a musician like Beethoven? And he talks about this in his letter to his brother, actually, the Heilige Stadt Testimony. I recommend reading it. It's online. You can just Google Beethoven Heiligenstadt. It's a long German word, but there'll be autocorrect, because I don't know how to spell it. So and he talks about walking in the countryside, which he loved, and by the way, which this piece evokes the countryside. And he was with some friends, and there was a shepherd singing in a distant field somewhere. And the friends noticed it, and Beethoven couldn't hear it. And he was very depressed about that. And it even got to the point that he said he was contemplating to take his own life because he didn't see any future without hearing. But somehow he found the resolve to continue. And I think that gets to the core of who Beethoven was as a musician and as a man, to transcend even the most difficult of circumstances. And it's inspiring for all of us. I know sometimes the holidays can be difficult. Everyone gets sick. I mean, I wanted to talk recently, and the days are shorter, and we all need that sort of hope even when you don't see it. But Beethoven somehow found it. And I think that's what this piece is about. At least that's how I see it. That's how I imagine it. And it's a piece of acceptance, actually. That's why it's so calm. It's not just calm and that's it. There's something under it, something very dark. But he's, accepting it in a philosophical manner. I mean, I don't mean to go off too much in this direction, but it's just things to think about. I think Beethoven, everyone knows his music, we talk about him so much, but to me, that's really what I see is that immense hope and belief in better things ahead, no matter what. I read a quote from someone. He said Beethoven perhaps didn't become Beethoven despite being deaf, but almost because he was deaf. In other words, sometimes the biggest obstacles that are thrown in our way make us form a certain way, if that makes sense. And I think that's definitely Beethoven. He had to develop inner hearing. He had to develop the capacity to imagine the music completely internally And by the end, he almost couldn't hear at all. There's a famous story. He was conducting the Ninth Symphony, the most gloriously uplifting music you can imagine. And everyone finished, the orchestra, the singer, and he was still conducting because the music was in his head. So that's Beethoven. And Beethoven's one of those people, he changed history. You know, nothing was the same after. He's that kind of personality. The theme to this second movement, like so many themes of Beethoven, is almost so deceptively simple. It sounds to me like a church hymn. I'll play you a little bit of it. And, you know, just to hear in the opening. Doesn't it sound like a hymn? I mean, etc. So I'm going to play you the rest, but he can take something that's almost banal, like that. That's not a soaring tune, but he takes that and he turns it really into something magic. So here's Beethoven's second movement of that violin concerto, arranged for the piano. And so that's a glimpse into Beethoven's, a side of Beethoven you might not always hear, the very intimate, inward-looking part of Beethoven. Somebody said about him that as his life progressed, his music, there's more and more silences. And I noticed that here, and maybe that's because he was living more and more in a world of silence. And not only that, but in that letter he wrote to his brother, he described how in losing his hearing, he did not feel comfortable in crowds and in social settings, and he isolated himself more and more. So you can hear that there. Anyway. So I'll do some short pieces now. Maybe a couple of these I did last time, but I think many of them I didn't. Here's a piece by Tchaikovsky called Melody in E flat. I think I mentioned, my father is a Southern Virginian from Portsmouth, Virginia. The family goes back many, many, many generations to the 1600s. My mother, being in this country, goes back to 1980. She came from Russia, from the Soviet Union at the time. So I really love to play Russian music, even though my Russian speaking is not that great. It feels familiar, just like Russian food and even Russian vodka, I shouldn't say. It's all very familiar. It just feels like home. So here's Tchaikovsky. Another thing is, I think of, in pretty much all of his music, ballet, because he wrote so many wonderful ballets, and that sense of dance, it's there. And this piece is no exception. So the Melody in E flat by Tchaikovsky, which he planned on being part of his violin concerto, but then scrapped at the last minute, wrote another movement, and set this aside. Composers do funny things like that. So. Yeah. the more mellow music, and then we'll move to eventually not so mellow. I'm going to play now also a very short transparent piece. This is by French composer Jean-Gabriel Marie, who's not, you don't hear that name all that much. It's a famous suite that he wrote called The Golden Wedding, and this is called La Cinquantaine, the 50th anniversary from that suite. It's a famous piece. The Woody Herman Big Band actually did it in the 40s, but they changed it a lot. So, but for the life of me, I can't find any information about the composer. I really just could not. He was a 19th century French Romantic composer. If I find more information, I will surely tell you, but I just couldn't. But this is a famous piece. Maybe it's his most famous piece. So you might recognize the melody. And it's kind of a salon piece in a sense. It captures two different moods to me. One is a whimsical, humorous mood, and another is, there's a sadness to it. But it's both at the same time. I think music can do that more than other things like language can. It just combines, a lot of the music of Schubert has that feeling. You know, it's the laughter through tears almost, or tears through laughter, I don't know. Both of those opposites at the same time. And the 50th anniversary, the title, to me, it brings up an image of a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary and speaking about the past. And there are some wonderful, positive, even funny memories, and then there's some sad memories, and it's all those two, I mean, not two, but it's just so many different things at the same time, and anyway, so here's the piece, La Cinquantaine by Jean-Gabriel Marie. Italian word called scherzando. It means jokingly. It doesn't necessarily mean ha ha, that kind of a joke, because you have Chopin's scherzos, which are like, I mean, what kind of a joke is that? But it's just not really a joke the way we did, but it's scherzando. It has a whimsical character to it. So I guess since we're in France, we might as well stay in France. I think I'm going to play for you the third movement now of César Franck's Violin Sonata, arranged for piano solo by Alfred Cortot. So I tell people the Franck Sonata is not to be confused with Frank Sinatra. They're both good, but it's just, and that's called a corny joke. It's a dad joke or whatever you want to call it. So I'm sorry, I can't help it. But a little bit about Franck, César Franck. He was born in Belgium, lived mostly in France, and was mainly a church organist, a great church organist. And the funny thing about Franck, he's sort of the opposite of Mozart in the sense that he wrote all of his masterpieces later in life. He was a late bloomer, like Bruckner, too, was also. Because people like to often say, oh, well, if I didn't do it as a child, well, it doesn't have to be. You can also be a Franck or a Bruckner. And there's a funny story about Franck and his music. He had this explosion of creativity in his later years. Some of it was spurred by Wagner, the influence of Wagner, but I'd argue he has his own style, and it comes out of organ music, I think, in many ways. And I think he was something of a Catholic mystic. So you'll hear it in the music. But at any rate, there was a performance, I don't think it was the Violin Sonata, I think it was his piano quintet, which is another incredible piece, gargantuan piece. And apparently his wife got mad at him because the piece is so volatile, it's so emotional, that she said, who is that person? This is not the man that I married. And we've been married for a long time. And where is this coming from? And she said, there's a whole part of a side of you I don't know about. And I just thought that was a little funny and interesting that his wife actually got mad at him for his compositions. But Franck, what else I would say about this sonata, a major thing is in Marcel Proust. There was I don't know, it was a comedian or someone who said that if you really want to sound pretentious, just start talking about Marcel Proust. But the point being that the first novel of his set, À la recherche du temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time, Swan's Way, there's a fictional violin sonata that figures in the plot pretty prominently. Many people believe that it's based on the Franck sonata. Probably is. And like Proust's writing, it doesn't go like Beethoven goes from point A to B to C. Beethoven takes you sort of on a narrative. Proust and Franck take you into a dream world, almost like a stream of consciousness. It's before that in history, but it has that feeling. And this third movement is called Recitative. Recitative is a spoken, semi-spoken, semi-sung passage for a singer. So it's improvisatory. I believe that this piece was born out of organ improvisations, and there's a practical need for organ improvisations. Imagine you're a church organist. I think it was either at, Saint-Sulpice or one of the big cathedrals, and everyone's taking communion. Imagine it's a large congregation. So you're the organist, you have to play music. And so if the piece that you're playing ends, well, you have to improvise. I think that's where this comes from. At least the first 2 pages are just so improvisational. But then it sort of goes into a direction almost. But anyway, here it is, the third movement of the Franck Violin Sonata, arranged for solo piano, obviously, by Cortot. heavy and intense music. Have you ever been to Belgium or the Netherlands? Anybody? Well, do you know it rains a lot there? And I think it must have rained when he wrote that. It just has that feeling to it. And so let's go to some sunnier weather countries. Well, at any rate, Franck, I think it's not, you wouldn't say that that's impressionism, but don't you think it's bordering on it a little bit? So it's getting there. So I'm going to play this wonderful habanero by Daniel Eric, well, arranged by Ericourt, written by Maurice Ravel. Played it last time. I'm going to do my best because we have Jane right here, so which can be scary. So anyway, not scary, but you know what I mean. Just want to get it just so. And I want you to also notice that you can sort of hear where Ravel is coming out of Franck, the use of color or the feeling of color even in sound. Ravel was, yes, he was French, he was a French impressionist. He was actually very controversial in his time. People like Fauré and even maybe the style of Franck, the style of that piece I played before by Gabriel Marie, though that was more the accepted style, and Debussy and Ravel were considered very bizarre at the time. Now we accept them as, it's like the French Impressionist painters. At first, people thought they were crazy or they needed to get their vision checked. But at any rate, Ravel has this interesting mix of Debussy's French Impressionism, but he grew up speaking Spanish. He grew up he was a Basque, so in the south of France, almost in Spain. And so I think that's why he was attracted to, in a lot of his music, Spanish themes. Think of Bolero. That's quite Spanish, or Alvarado de Gracioso. So this piece is no exception. The habanera is originally a Cuban dance from Havana with this rhythm, Like in Carmen, there's a famous, habanera. But of course, what Ravel does to it is different from Carmen. It's Ravel. And it's originally for voice with no lyrics, almost like humming. And you hear it on flute, you hear it on violin, which is how I got to it, violin recordings. And then this solo piano version, of course, is done by Daniel Ericourt. So here it is. interesting contrast. I'm going to play a habanera by Pablo de Sarasate. I just learned this not so long ago. Also violin piece, and this is very different from everything I've played. It's quite sharp and alive, and I'm not alive, not the word I'm looking for, because the Ravel, it's very piquant and dry. That's the word I'm looking for. If the Franc is rainy, this is arid Spain. And also thinking of the Airy Chorus, because they love Spain very much. You know, Jane has told me. I think their home is even based on the Spanish theme. So now, when I play this, I don't know what it is, but I just imagine in my mind either a bullfighter or a conquistador. I don't know. It just, the image of that is stuck in my head the entire time I play it. Can't help it. It has the same habanera rhythm, but it's quite different from the Ravel. The Ravel is almost like he took the habanera and he put some watercolors around it. That's kind of how I imagine. This is not watercolors. It's pencil sketch. You know, it's dry and sort of punchy. So here it is. I feel like I'm a wine critic. No, I'm just kidding. So wine tasting and music. Maybe there's an idea for pairing wines with the composition at hand, right? So yeah. But the pianist cannot participate. Only after. of time. I don't want to overstay my welcome, but I thought since Christmas is coming, I might as well play some Christmas music. This is admittedly, I'm going to try a half-baked attempt to sound a little bit like Dave Brubeck or a stride pianist, really, because it's just not in my jazz. I love jazz, but to actually really do it, I think you need to devote way more time than I'm doing. So, have you seen those pictures of, it's a funny thing. It says like, you've worked on the assignment. Here's what it looks like, and it's a beautiful drawing of a horse, very detailed. But you've procrastinated, and the last day you finished. You drew the tail and the back legs, and it looks like a stick figure that a child would do. So that's how I feel this is compared to the Dave Brubeck original. So let's see what happens. This is Santa Claus is coming to town, Yeah, you had everything from César Franck and Ravel and Héricourt to, yes, Santa Claus is coming to town. So, Santa Claus. I'll do two somewhat quick Christmas gospel things. If we have time, it's okay. I can do one if better. Otherwise, almost five, or it is five. Maybe I'll do the upbeat one.
Okay.
So I'm going to play "Go Tell It on the Mountain" in a Southern gospel style. Now it in some ways is a bit similar to the last one I did, but not really. It has a stride, but it's a different feel. It's a gospel stride, and I think gospel musicians would say, no, it's different from jazz and such. So, and they would say, probably rightly so, that this style of music, the jazz and blues, and it really started in the church rather than the other way around. So anyway, here's some improvisation around. It's going to be a little different from what you might normally hear this as, but "Go Tell It on the Mountain." A little early to play it, right? But why not? Okay. So, yeah. Well, Advent. thank you all so much. I think we'll call it a day or an evening here. Dinner is probably, I don't want you to miss that, so food is the most
But
important
I
thing.
just want you to know that Betty Williams is here with her family.
Oh, Betty?
Let you
Oh.
be known because he opened your gift.
Yes.
And he loved it and he already had the chocolate.
Thank you very much. Yes, I didn't eat all of it, but I ate much of it, and it helped me. It helped me a lot, I think. It gave me that energy boost. Thank you very much for the beautiful gift. Great to see you all.
When are you coming back?
Oh, I don't know, whenever they'll tolerate me. So, I'll in the new year.
Sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Oh.
And a little thank you from Will for everything.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I really appreciate it.
You don't have to do it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Glad you came in.
Watch out.
That's okay, that's okay. I told you that it's
You gotta
okay.
stood up a long time.
And it did.